How does a company that invents the future end up buried by it? This isn't a story about a business that was caught sleeping. It's about a titan that stared directly into the eyes of its own creation, saw its own death, and chose to look away. This is the story of how Eastman Kodak, the king of the Kodak moment, developed the first digital camera, and then spent the next 30 years hoping it would just go away. The year is 1975. In a quiet research lab in Rochester, New York, a 24-year-old Kodak engineer named Steven Sasson is building something impossible. It's a Frankenstein's monster of a device, cobbled together from a movie camera lens, a new type of sensor called a charge-coupled device, and a digital cassette recorder. It weighs a hefty 8 pounds, and it looks more like a toaster than a camera. Sasson calls over a lab technician. He takes her picture. There is no click, no whir of film advancing. There is only a 23-second silence as the camera's circuits digest the scene and write a string of ones and zeros to the cassette tape. The image is a ghostly 100 by 100 pixel black and white specter, 10,000 pixels in total, a digital ghost. He takes his invention to the executives. He shows them the image on a television screen. The engineers in the room see the future. Filmless photography, instant images, electronic transmission. The executives, however, see something else entirely. They see a threat to everything that made Kodak a fortress. After the demo, the response is polite but clear. It's a cute novelty. But, as Sasson would later recall, they warned him not to tell anyone about it outside that room. To understand that reaction, you have to understand the empire they were protecting. In 1976, just 1 year after Sasson's invention, Kodak controlled an estimated 90% of the film market and 85% of the camera market in the United States. The iconic yellow box wasn't just a product. It was a cultural institution. The phrase, "a Kodak moment," was embedded in the global lexicon. This wasn't a company. It was a utility for human memory. The business model was a work of genius, a perfect razor and blades system. You might buy the Kodak camera once, but you bought the film, the photo paper, and the processing chemicals over and over and over again. Every click of the shutter was the start of a new sale. Analysts estimated that the gross margins on film were north of 60, even 70%. It was an annuity, a cash machine so powerful it funded a workforce of over 140,000 people and made Rochester, New York, a city that ran on Kodak paychecks. But no fortress is impregnable forever. The first crack appeared in 1984 at the Los Angeles Olympics. On its home turf, Kodak was shockingly outmaneuvered. Japan's Fuji photo film snatched the official sponsorship. Suddenly, television screens across America were filled with Fuji's bright green branding. More importantly, Fuji used the opportunity to push into American retail, undercutting Kodak's prices. The moat had been breached. The comfortable monopoly had a real competitor. Inside Kodak, the digital revolution continued, but it was kept on a very short leash. In 1991, they released the Kodak DCS-100, the world's first commercially available digital single-lens reflex camera. It was a beast, a standard Nikon F3 film camera body with Kodak's digital guts crammed inside, tethered by a thick cable to a massive external storage unit you had to carry on your shoulder. It shot a respectable 1.3 megapixel image. And the price? Well over $10,000. This was a tool for photojournalists at major news agencies who needed to transmit photos from the field in minutes, not hours. For them, the cost was justified. For Kodak management, it was perfect. Digital was a high-margin, low-volume professional tool. It was a niche. It wasn't a threat to the consumer film business. It was safely contained. Instead of embracing the digital shift for consumers, Kodak doubled down on what it knew best. In 1996, they led a massive industry push for the Advanced Photo System, or APS, which they branded Advantix. It was a marvel of film-era engineering, a smaller, foolproof cartridge, different print aspect ratios, and even a feature on some cameras to see a tiny preview of your shot. It was a better, smarter film. It was the world's most advanced horse-drawn carriage, delivered just as the automobile was rolling off the assembly line. Kodak sank hundreds of millions into Advantix. But consumers were already hearing the siren song of digital. Adoption was slow, and the massive investments in manufacturing capacity quickly became a liability. The write-downs began. Kodak had spent a fortune perfecting a dying format, convinced that customers wanted better film, when what they really wanted was to get rid of film altogether. The next great fork in the road was the Internet. In 2001, Kodak made a brilliant move. It acquired a photo-sharing website called Ofoto for a reported $25 million. Here it was, the chance to own the digital ecosystem. Ofoto could have become Flickr. It could have been the precursor to Instagram. It was a platform for a community built around sharing memories, untethered from paper. But Kodak's DNA was ink on paper. They saw Ofoto not as a network, but as a digital pipeline to their printing business. The entire user experience was re-engineered to do one thing: get people to order 4x6 prints. Every feature, every button, every email was a nudge to buy paper copies. They owned the social network of photos before the term existed, and they turned it into a web-based mail-order kiosk. The platform wasn't the product. The print was. As the early 2000s wore on, the consumer market finally tilted. Digital point-and-shoot cameras flooded the market, and film sales began to collapse in double-digit declines year after year. And here's the ultimate irony. For a brief moment, Kodak actually won. Around 2005, they were #1 in U.S. market share for digital cameras. They were moving more boxes than anyone else. But it was a hollow victory. Consumer electronics was a brutal, low-margin business, a world away from the easy profits of film. They were competing with nimble, efficient manufacturers like Sony and Canon. Prices were in freefall. A camera model was obsolete in a year. Kodak was winning a game where the prize for selling a $50 camera was maybe a few dollars in profit. Each digital camera sold not only failed to replace the film profits, it actively cannibalized them. Their success was accelerating their own demise. The market could see the writing on the wall. In April 2004, the final symbolic blow landed. Eastman Kodak, a component of the Dow Jones Industrial Average since 1930, was removed from the index. It was a quiet, public humiliation, Wall Street's official declaration that Kodak was no longer a pillar of American industry. The giant was stumbling, and everyone could see it. The final years were a flurry of desperate maneuvers. There were endless restructurings and painful layoffs in Rochester. They made a late, costly entry into the home inkjet printer market, hoping to replicate the razor and blades model with ink cartridges. But the market was already dominated by HP and Epson. It was another money pit. The company that once defined its market was now a follower, chasing scraps in someone else's. With cash dwindling, Kodak turned to its last remaining treasure, its vast portfolio of digital imaging patents. The company that once made things now made lawsuits. They sued everyone, including Apple and BlackBerry maker RIM, hoping for a massive payout that could fund a turnaround. But in a critical 2011 ruling, a judge sided against them. The lifeline snapped. the backup plan was gone. On January 19, 2012, the inevitable happened. Eastman Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The 130-year-old empire, the bedrock of an entire city, the company that taught the world to remember, had run out of road. The film business was a shadow of its former self, and the digital business had never paid the bills. To exit bankruptcy, Kodak had to sell its crown jewels. In late 2012, a consortium of tech giants, including Apple, Google, and Samsung, the very companies that now owned the world of images, bought Kodak's digital imaging patents for about $525 million. The patents, born in Sasson's lab, didn't fund Kodak's rebirth. They were sold off to pay its creditors. They were selling the blueprint of the future to pay for the debts of the past. So what is the lesson here? Kodak wasn't blind. It wasn't stupid. It was cursed by its own success. The company's core business was so stupendously profitable that it created an immune system that attacked any innovation that threatened it. You cannot expect an organization whose every incentive, from the CEO's bonus to the factory floor manager's budget, is tied to selling film, to embrace a future without it. The hardest disruption to navigate is the one that comes from within your own walls. Kodak saw the future in 1975 on a flickering television screen in a dark lab. They saw the ghost in their own machine. They just couldn't afford to believe it was real until it was too late.